Hello, my name's Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents. I'm continuing my discussion debunking the theory that the mafia had JFK, our 35th president, killed. There's That is actually I think it is nonsensical. I don't think there's any fact behind it, and I'll give my reasons. And one of the things I'm actually going to do is provide the structure of the mafia from books that I've read. Again, this is something this isn't an authoritative video or anything like that. This is just based on my own opinion, my analysis, and of information that's in the public domain. And because I've read a lot about U.S. presidents, about JFK. Of course, there have been so many conspiracy theories surrounding, President Kennedy's assassination, and of course, I have read The Godfather, and I realized that I've read a couple of other mafia books as well. I can't remember which ones, but I still have a very good recollection of the how structured and organized the Italian mafia in the U.S. Uh, is or was, at least during the 40s, 50s, 60s. There was this uh, hierarchical structure to the mafia. It was like a business, and I read it in a book, but I don't think it would have been in The Godfather, because The Godfather he's telling a story. He's telling has a very good narrative, uh, you know, style about it, and he doesn't go into something technical. So the structure of the mafia seems very technical, and I don't think that's something Mario Puzo would have done. Right? You would have had to, uh, it would have had to be intuitive. If you figured out a structure, it would have had to be intuitive. And what I'm going to do is, while I provide the structure, in fact, I'm going to show you. I'm going to give examples of the levels that are in the structure of the organizational chart of the mafia. By the way, again, this is information that's out there. It's on the internet. Um, you know, so I'm going to, just juxtapose these levels with the movie The Godfather, with the characters in The Godfather, because all those people, there was the Don Corleone, played by Marlon Brando. He was the boss, and of course there was an underboss. The underboss was Sonny, his son, and of course there was a consigliere, or also called the the lawyer or legal advisor or counselor. That was Tom Hayden, right? So I'll get into it later on. Um, but Something I wanted to quickly point out was the issue of the motive, the incentive. Again, the mafia was a going concern, and they see themselves like some kind of government, and they keep order. They maintain order. They believe that they are, they're filling a vacuum, and their objective is not to ruffle feathers. They don't want to rock the boat. They actually smooth things over. So they view themselves as resolving conflicts, even though, yes, they use violence as a mechanism, just like a government, right? A government uses the military, violence as a mechanism, but they don't like to do it. Governments don't go to war every day. So the mafia sees itself as, in this light as well, with regard to its use of violence, right? It doesn't just resort to violence all the time. And again, remember, they do these philanthropic deeds because they view themselves as like a benevolent entity, enterprise, that they want to carry the affections of the community they're living in, right? They want to be felt needed by the community. Remember the beginning of The Godfather. The Godfather was offended that uh, yeah, Bonacera, the Undertaker, who came asking for a favor, he hadn't tried to be the Godfather's friend. He had shunned him. he felt he didn't need the assistance or friendship of the Godfather. So so you see the mafia, they want to feel that they're needed, they're admired, they're respectable, and they provide a service in the a needed service in the community. Even though yes, they control crime, the black market, contraband. Again, they feel that they control a market that, even though that it's not legal, society still needs them. It's just like alcohol, drinking during the time of the prohibition. People, politicians drank. They still drank, even though that it was illegal to drink. In fact, they said the president Warren G. Harding used to drink alcohol as well. He used to have parties with alcohol, even though it was illegal. So who provides that alcohol? Who makes sure? Who facilitates the bootlegging enterprises? The mafia. The same thing with brothels, prostitution. It's illegal, but they facilitate the services of brothels and things like that, and so they make a lot of money from these activities that are, they're contraband, they're illegal, there's a black market, they control it, and they want to use as little violence as possible. They also offer protection, right? They view themselves as offering protection. They police their communities, so they expect, like, there's a business outfit out there, the business should pay them like a commission, some kind of tax, just like the federal government collects tax from the people. The mafia, they also want, the community businesses to pay them some kind of protection fee. If you don't, then maybe somebody's going to burn down your business. There's going to be a robber who's going to steal things, rob things, and all that. Well, if you pay a fee, well, nobody's going to be burning down your business. There won't be any robberies and things like that. So that's how they see them. They see them as, smoothing things over, not ruffling feathers. And so it will be counter their organization to actually go and kill the president of the United States, because again, mafia operates this respectability, right? There's this culture. I lived in Italy. I like to talk about that, and I noticed something about Italians. They're big on respect. They're big on respect. So you see, mafia still has that Italian culture, respectability, respect. They're very courteous. You see, you come out in the morning, people greet each other and they're very courteous. It's not like in America that nobody says hello, everybody's in a hurry. No, in Italy, you see Italians, they're very community based. They're respectable. They don't showboat, right? So why would they respect authority. Funny enough, they respect authority. It's kind of complex. It's a paradox. So that goes back to the organizational chart of the mafia. So they would respect the president of the United States, that he's head of an organization. Hey, they probably view the American government as the biggest gangster organization. It's a big gangster organization that they would not challenge, right? Even though, they're just interested in controlling their their business enterprises. Again, they'd rather buy you over, right, with money. They'd rather buy over law enforcement, cops in their pockets, bribe politicians. In fact, I was watching Michael Franz ZC's podcast. He's an ex, mob boss, and he talks about, how much he used to make in a week. $10 million a week, right? They're making a lot of money. Al Capone, everybody knows Al Capone. During his day, 1920s, 1930s, before he was imprisoned for tax evasion, he was making $105 million in revenue in a year. That was a lot of money back then. It's $105 million in revenue, still a lot of money today. He was one of the richest Americans, right? So you're making that kind of money. They have enough money to buy politicians. Again, remember, that's the objective, right? To win, buy over, politicians, and in fact have their own people be politicians as well, be senators, be governors, so they don't want to, just cause wars unnecessarily. You know, there was Lucky Luciano. Lucky people know Lucky Luciano. He was once the most powerful guy in the mafia. Prior to him, there was a guy called Salvatore Maranzano became capo di tutti capi. That's supposed to be like boss of the bosses, and that's not a title that really exists because there are different families, right? Mob bosses, and they have their territory. New York is was famously known as having five families, and you see even the movie Godfather portrayed it that there were five families running New York, and they sort of split territories. They don't step on each other's toes. Now, the times they shed blood, if they because normally they would sit together and talk and have their discussions and and talk things over in a respectable fashion, right? They don't want bloodshed. The times that they get violent, where there's a lot of killing, so they call them like a civil war. So where they're shaking up the status quo and basically they're gonna maybe eliminate the whole family or someone's overthrowing a family or something. So that's when you see there's major bloodbath. Now let me quickly go into the organization I was talking about. So there's the boss right at the top. So if you look at the movie The Godfather, the Don Corleone, he was the boss, and under him there's an underboss. That's his son. He's the heir apparent. The boss is like a CEO, right? He's the one who makes the decisions. He's the one who inducts people into the organization, the mafia organization, right? He gets a share of the whole enterprise's businesses, right? Right. He's the one with a lot of money, right? And so he takes care of everybody under him, and they call their thing uh, the family, a family organization. By the way, Cosa Nostra means our thing. So that just goes back to um, the mafia filling a vacuum, because when Italians started immigrating into America, in the early part, the turn of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, they faced a lot of discrimination, right, from Anglo-Saxons, from Western Europeans. They faced a lot of discrimination, and so the mafia sort of saw itself as protecting their own people, and they would police their communities themselves. So I mentioned the boss. That's the Don, like Don Corleone in the movie The Godfather. Under him is his heir apparent, his son, Sonny. In That was the underboss. He's the one under the boss. The underboss is heir apparent, and he's like you can view him as a. If we looked at a modern corporation, you have a CEO. So the boss is like the CEO. Under the CEO, you have the chief operating officer. The chief operating officer is usually going to succeed the CEO, right? He's the next most powerful person because he runs the day-to-day op, operations, right, of the outfit, and that's what the underboss was doing. And then you have the consigliere. In the movie, the consigliere was Tom Hagen. He's a lawyer. He's a legal advisor, right? He's a counselor, the consigliere. And under the then in the middle level, like middle management, the people like that's like a branch manager. If you're talking about a bank, right? A branch manager, a manager, mid-level manager. So they call them captains or capo regimes. In the movie, there were two that take note of: Clemenza, the fat guy, and the other guy, Tessio. Tessio is the one who sold out the Godfather, who to the other family, to Barzini and Tartaglia, and they, you know, he was a turncoat. So under them you have the soldato of foot soldiers, right? So that's the entry level of the mafia, right? They take the oath, the omerto, and the mafia, they're big on silence, right? They don't talk. In fact, for a long time, the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover denied the existence of the mafia, right? That they didn't exist. That's what he used to say. They claimed that the mafia had something on him and were blackmailing him, and that's why. And maybe they were taking care of him. I don't know. But J. Edgar Hoover was known to have been into gambling, horse race gambling, and placing bets. The mafia, that's something they also that's a racket they also tend to control gambling, right? So uh, so you can see that they have this organizational structure. They're highly organized, and the decision maker is the boss. Like in New York, they have the five families, right? So the boss, they all gather together, and they don't have, even though the mafia is, they're distributed all over America. they're in different cities. They're in Chicago, they're in Florida. Everybody, they have their mafia. They each boss of a family is respected, and they have meetings. So in the 20s, 30s, uh, before there was a the early part of the 20th century, there was a guy called Salvatore Maranzano, and he'd had some kind of war, and he sort of declared himself capo di tutti capi. That's the boss of bosses. Um, a guy called Lucky Luciano. Most people won't know Lucky Luciano. He got him eliminated, right? He had him killed. So Lucky Luciano should have been the new Capo di Tutti Capi, but he didn't. He didn't ever use that title. In fact, he abolished it. He abolished it, and he created what was called the commission. And so all the bosses, they meet together. They're equal. Somebody can chair the meeting, like Lucky Luciano would chair the meeting, but there was no boss of bosses. He abolished it, even though somebody might be obviously more powerful. But he didn't want to create that conflict or rivalry, because they would continue to rival. It would be a source of war and of rivalry. Somebody would want to be the top person, and he wanted to eliminate um, that incentive, right? That motive to want to get, for anybody to want to compete for the top position. So all the bosses had, some kind of equal respectability. If you're a boss, you have your turf, and that's it, whatever. Um, so basically, you see, it's highly organized. They make a tremendous amount of money. In fact, Michael Franzese, right, was saying that he was making $10 million a week. $10 million a week during his time. So these entities, they make a lot of money, and obviously, as he said, he also said he had politicians in his pocket, right? He said he had politicians, he had cops in his pocket. He said, what's his name, had politicians and cops in his pocket, Al Capone, um, so again, and they have strict codes they go by. Again, I've never been a part of the mafia. I don't know anybody in the mafia. I've lived in Italy. I had roommates, of course. I wanted to know, and so they tell me stuff. In fact, I had roommates who were from Calabria. Calabria is another big. They have a big mafia outfit. So typically, what became very popular in America were the Sicilian mafia, right, from Sicily, and so there's a Calabria mafia as well. In Italy, they have different regions. They have their mafia as well. So so of course I got this information from just asking, Italians. This stuff Italians know. And again, they don't showboat. They're not loud. People who are really in the mafia are not loud, right? So that movie Casino. You see how loud and ostentatious what's his name was. Joe Pesci's character was. He was not a made man. So you see, the day they told him he was going to be a made man, he was whacked. They killed him. So he never became a made man. So the people who are actually in the mafia, they're understated, right? They don't want to draw attention. They don't want to be investigated by cops. They appear to be respectable members of the community, even though, yeah, they're gangsters, but hey, they're big on laundering their image. They're big on laundering their image. So killing the if you have politicians who support you, who back you up, killing the president of the United States, the head of the biggest. If they think in terms that everything is like a gangster organization, they understand the United States government would be the biggest in the world, and that's just somewhere they would not fight it. They're like a supreme. I don't like to, because I'm a devout Christian, I don't like to compare anything to God, but they do see the United States as some kind of entity they don't mess with, right? Because who's going to fight can the mafia fight the U.S. military? The president of the United States is actually he's commander in chief of the U.S. military. They can't fight the U.S. military. It's not just fighting the cops anymore. It wouldn't be just fighting the cops, the FBI, the CIA. You'd be fighting the military, the army, the navy. Can the mafia, do they have the the manpower, the ammunition to fight the United States government. No, they don't. The military, they can't fight them. So that's a decision they would make. So if one of the bosses, say Sam Giancana, said he wanted to, uh, you know, uh, have the president assassinated, the rest of the bosses would never agree to that, right? It's something. It's a one boss wouldn't just make such a drastic decision that would affect the whole mafia outfit. Because um, if law enforcement, American people understand that the mafia killed the president of the United States, the whole United States government is going to be hunting down the mafia, everybody, and it would, would the other bosses want to fight? It would destroy their businesses, their enterprise. They wouldn't want to do that. So it's not something they would sign off on, even if one mafia boss wanted to have the president killed again. And to be at the top, the mafia people are very, very intelligent, right? It's not going to benefit them. What are they going to get out of it, out of killing the president of the United States? They're not going to get anything out of it. They're just going to, it will be autothesis, right? Autothesis, right? That's like, it's called suicidal altruism, right? When an organism, is just programmed to destroy itself, right? It commits suicide, right? Why would the mafia do that? They want to be a going concern. They want to keep making money for their families, for themselves, and they want to pass it on to another generation. If they go to war with the United States government, United States armed forces, it's something they would not survive, right? So if one of the bosses, in the commission, suggested it, he would have to suggest it to the other bosses would have to agree, right? If they were to suggest it, they would say no. In fact, they'd kill him, because that would be a stupid thought to them. Remember, the bosses at the top, they're actually very cerebral. They're different forms of intelligence. They may not be book smart, right? But they're very street smart. They're very shrewd. They're very organizational, savvy, smart, right? They're smart in terms of organization and survival, right? How to remain a top dog, how to survive, right? Political savvy. They're very smart, with regard to that, and they know that would threaten their existence. Killing the president of the United States, even thinking about it, even discussing it, would threaten their existence. If they even succeeded, politicians would run away from them. The United States government can create a law to eliminate the mafia, to just go after them. In fact, RICO laws were created. RICO, that's racketeering, influence, corrupt organizations. It was created to actually check the mafia in some regard, right? To check them, limit them, to stop them. Because back then, if a prosecutor tried to go after them, witnesses who wanted to testify, potential witnesses or witnesses who wanted to testify against the mafia, they would just not show up in court the next day. They'd disappear. They'd be killed or something. They'd just disappear. And so RICO laws were really a check on the mafia. So they can actually create a law in the United States to eliminate the mafia. One of the things taxes are also used for, apart from generating revenue for the government, is also to, it is a mechanism to eliminate, some activity the United States government does not like, or any government in the United States they don't like. They can tax something out of existence, right? Just like the government is now trying to, fine the H-1B visa, category out of existence by making them pay $100,000. Nobody's going to want to pay $100,000 anymore. It's just going to die off, right? So they can tax. They have different mechanisms, laws that they can formulate to eliminate the mafia, and that's something the government can do. So it's just not something that the mafia bosses would sign off on. Besides, if they didn't, I've watched videos, documentaries, and where they've said, well, Sam Giancana hated John Kennedy, the one that he was sleeping with his girlfriend. I don't know if that was true, or that he also hated him because Sam Giancana, that was a mob boss, right? He claimed that he got Kennedy into the White House, and that he sort of his brother was sort of double crossing him, double crossing the mafia by prosecuting and really putting heat going after the mafia, right? And so, yeah, if you don't like the mafia, if the mafia didn't like what John Kennedy was doing by prosecuting them, uh, there was another way to get rid of a president. Every 4 years, Americans have the ability to get rid of their president by through elections, a vote. And by the way, Sam Giancana, the mafia boss, he claimed he got Kennedy in through elections, right? He didn't have to kill Eisenhower to get Kennedy to make Kennedy president. He didn't have to kill Nixon. He didn't have to kill any president, anybody, to make Kennedy president, right? It was a vote. He claimed he rigged votes, right? Well, then he had 1 year, you know, less than 1 year to do that, just a year away to get rid of Kennedy through the votes again, through elections. So that's something the mafia knows, right? So something, by the way, if they're planning a major hit like that, they plan long term, right? They plan careful planning, and they look 1 year. 1 year, they don't like this guy, they want him out of office. Well, they can rig elections again, right? They can just rig elections and it will be out. It wouldn't cost anything, right? Blood is very costly to them. It would make them extremely unpopular. They would go after their businesses. No, so the mafia definitely did not kill. They did not have JFK killed. Even Sam Giancana, if he decided to, if it was something that if one mafia boss decided to do that hit on his own, he wouldn't survive. He'd know that, okay, he'd signed his death warrant. Yes, Sam Giancana was killed in a very horrifying fashion. He was killed, but that was during the time of the hearings, right? The congressional hearings, when they wanted to find out the intelligence community and the CIA's activities regarding assassination attempts on Castro and other things, right? So he was killed. He was eliminated. Another guy, John Rosselli, the guy who was also involved in the Bay of Cuba invasion and assassination attempts on Fidel Castro, he was also killed. But the third mafia boss, the third boss that was involved, Asanto Trafficante, he wasn't killed. In fact, he appeared at the hearings, right? He didn't give much information, but he wasn't killed. Why kill two? And so those people were probably hit by the mob for other reasons, right? Could they have been hit because they were involved in assassinating Kennedy? Again, look, that would be the dumbest thing in the world for the mafia to do. And I know that Michael Franzese is Franzese, whom I watch. I watch his podcast. He said that he thinks Kennedy's assassination was a mob hit, but he says it from anecdotes, from what he's heard people say, what he heard people say around him, not anything authoritative that that it was X and ABC person who planned and they did it, that this was how they did it. Nothing like that. Just so just hearsay, just old wives tales, just gossip, right? Nothing authoritative, right? So that's just something again that mobsters like to do sometimes, right? They just do that to show, but nothing authoritative that anybody in particular planned and executed the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The mafia, from the way they operate, from their style, from the strict discipline, right? From the aspirations, from the intelligence their bosses have, That's something that the mafia was not involved with. Someone may have tried to make it look like the mafia. I'm going to do a subsequent video and wrap it up on what I think, my analysis of things, how I think things happened. But the mafia most certainly did not have JFK killed. I mean, from what I'm analyzing, it wouldn't make sense. It would be counter to the way the mafia operates. It would be counter to it, and considering their aspirations, their influence, it just would be counter to it. If they wanted to get rid of Kennedy, they're business people. They want to get rid of him. The way they brought him in through rigging votes, as they claimed, well, they would, they had just 1 year to go, and they could remove him through rigging votes again, right? If they claim that's how they brought him in, so it wouldn't make sense to have him assassinated and bring the whole force of the United States government against them. You have to remember, Americans are very unpredictable, right? If you go to the South, I lived in the South for 4 years in Alabama. I went to school there. And remember, Americans have the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Everybody can bear arms, right? That's how they see it, the right to bear arms. Now, they see it as a right protecting not just their capacity for self-defense, not just not just the self-defense right, but they also see it as a duty, a call to check the potential usurpation of the government by a cabal or a tyrannical group. That's how they see it in the South. Many Americans see the rights, the Second Amendment, as being a right to protect the government from any group that attempts to take over the government. Again, killing the President of the United States, that would be a coup d'etat. It would be an act of treason. And at that point, Americans who can be very, as Alexander Hamilton said, they are unpredictable, they can be fickle, they can be, they're mercurial, they have guns. Whoever look, people in the South, everybody's got guns. They're not afraid of individuals who are mafia. In the end, each person has his own life. Your life is one. And where Americans all have guns, right? They're not really scared to duke it out with you, right? They don't really fear things like that. It's the law-abiding people who decide, okay, they're not violent, who might be scared. But if you go to the South where people all have guns, they're not scared of anybody, right? So you just be, and they're passionate about their government. They have that belief that somebody's actually killed the president and is trying to usurp the government of the United States. Why do you want to, why would an intelligent person want to make themselves sitting ducks and be at risk of being killed by gun-toting Americans, many of whom are not afraid to die. They got guns, so hey, that's a good deterrent right there, not to attempt to overthrow the government of the United States, because Americans have guns and you'd have to duke it out with them. Right, so hey, no, the mafia didn't do that. It was most likely, it probably was an experiment gone wrong. It could have been the Soviets, and again, something we do have. We have a lot of lone wolves in America, people like Lee Harvey Oswald, and they're unpredictable, and you see a number of people who've been assassins. Like James Garfield's assassin, the guy who assassinated our 20th president, James Garfield, was a crazy guy who got a gun. Charles Guiteau. We've had many crazy people like that. The anarchist who killed William McKinley was a crazy guy. So we have loonies who have a gun. That happens in America. So any mafia boss, anybody who thinks they can just do something, they still have these alienated lone wolves out there to contend with. So they're very careful. They don't want to incur the wrath of these wackos with guns out there, right? So those are that the mafia hitting the president is not a it's not a deliberate, well thought decision. It's not the sort of thing that the mafia would plan because hey, they're thinking, uh, they're thinking going concern. You see, they have their influences all over the place, from casinos to having lots of politicians, law enforcement in their pockets and things like that. They don't want to go to war with the United States government. It's something they didn't plan. It's something they didn't do. Yeah. This video has gotten long, so I think I've put to rest that issue, and I'm going to do a subsequent video and conclude regarding what the mafia was doing with the CIA. So the mafia's and CIA's involvement in the assassination attempts assassination attempts on Fidel Castro, and which may have had a blowback and caused the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. My name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents. I also draw attention to call of law violations which I've been suffering in Montgomery County, Maryland, from a swatting in which I was a victim on May 16, 2023 in my own home. I'm a law-abiding American citizen. As of that day, I was an auditor in the Department of the Navy, a law-abiding American citizen, had never been arrested. I follow the rules, and I was assaulted under color of law. The police raided me, committed an armed robbery under color of law. My property was taken. I was shot in the head, and they framed me and they made it seem like they suborned perjury by making someone file a fraudulent, fabricated emergency evaluation petition. My family is in Nigeria. I have no history of mental illness. I don't suffer from a mental illness. I've never suffered from one. I don't use drugs. I've never used drugs. But Montgomery County police officers and some other agents acting in concert with them assaulted me in my own home to cover up and impede an equal employment opportunity complaint I'd filed against some rogue rogue federal employees in the Department of Defense and Department of the Navy. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.